I didn't make a scene. I didn't cry. I just stood there in the middle of the Hargrove and Associates lobby, holding a cardboard box full of my things, and I smiled. Not because anything was funny. Because I had already decided, weeks before that moment, that I was done being the kind of woman who falls apart in front of people who don't deserve her tears. My husband was standing 20 feet away. He had his hand on the small of my former best friend's back, and he was laughing at something she said. That same laugh I used to love, the one that made his eyes crinkle at the corners. I used to think that laugh was mine. It wasn't. Let me back up. My name is Nadia. I'm 37 years old. For 12 years, I worked as a senior financial analyst at Hargrove and Associates, a private wealth management firm in Denver, Colorado. I built that career from nothing, started as a junior associate fresh out of CU Boulder, stayed late when everyone else went home, learned every system, memorized every client file, covered for colleagues who never once covered for me. I was also, for 9 of those 12 years, married to my husband. He was a contractor, the kind who could look at a crumbling Victorian and see exactly what it could become. That was the thing about him. He always saw potential in things. In houses, in projects, in himself. Just not in me. Not anymore. And Bridget, my best friend of 14 years, my maid of honor. The woman who held my hand when my mother had her hip surgery, who slept on my couch for 3 weeks after her own divorce, who knew every single thing about me, my fears, my regrets, the way I cried in the car after hard days. She knew everything, and she used it. It started, the way these things always do, with something small I was too trusting to question. Bridget started joining us for dinners more often. Coming over on weekends when she used to say weekends were for errands. Texting my husband about contractors she allegedly needed for her bathroom renovation, which, funny enough, never seemed to get finished. I noticed. I'm not stupid. I have a master's degree in finance and I can spot an anomaly in a spreadsheet from 30 feet. But I told myself I was being paranoid. I told myself these were two people I loved, and love doesn't do that. Love doesn't betray. I was wrong. He told me on a Tuesday. Just a regular Tuesday in February, sleet on the windows, leftover pasta on the stove. He sat down across from me at the kitchen table, the one we picked out together at a flea market in Boulder, the one I refinished myself because I wanted it to look like something from a farmhouse, and he said, "I don't think I can do this anymore." I put down my fork. "Do what?" I asked, and then he said her name. I remember the exact sound the fork made when I set it on the plate. That little ceramic clink. I remember it because everything after that went very quiet. He didn't move out immediately. There was a week of what I can only describe as administrative grief. Who takes what? Who calls the lease office? Who tells which friends? He was careful, methodical, almost businesslike, the way he got when he was managing a project. That was when I understood. To him, our marriage had become something to be managed, to be wrapped up and filed away. Bridget texted me 4 days later. "I'm so sorry, Nadia. I never meant for this to happen. I care about you both so much. I hope someday you'll understand." I read it twice. Then I put my phone face down on my desk and went back to work. The divorce was handled by my attorney. I didn't want mediation, didn't want a long process. We had a house, a beautiful craftsman bungalow in Washington Park, that we'd spent 3 years renovating together. My husband wanted to keep it. I let him buy out my share. It was a fair number. I took it, put it in a high-yield savings account, and didn't look back. Or at least, I tried not to. The thing about betrayal is it doesn't come for you once. It comes for you in waves on Sunday mornings when you realize you have no one to make coffee for. At the grocery store when you reach for the brand of cereal he liked, and then remember you don't have to do that anymore. At work, when Bridget's name comes up on the firm's referral list because she's apparently now a client referred by my husband, who used my professionals network to walk his new life right through my front door. That one made my jaw tighten. Hargrove and Associates was where I had spent a decade building something real. My clients trusted me. My portfolio performance had been in the top 5% of the firm for 3 consecutive years. My manager, a woman named Helen, sharp, fair, the kind of boss you worked hard for because she worked hard for you, had put my name up for a directorship. And then my husband started dating Bridget, and Bridget, it turned out, had money. Old money, actually, the kind that gets inherited quietly and sits in trusts that need managing, the kind that brought her into Hargrove and Associates as a high-value client. She requested me specifically as her advisor. I went to Helen the morning I saw the assignment slip. "I can't take this client," I said. Helen looked at me over her reading glasses. "Personal conflict?" "Personal," I said. "Yes." She reassigned the account without a single question. That was the kind of woman Helen was. I was grateful. What I didn't know, what I couldn't have predicted, was that my husband had been having a conversation with the firm's managing partner, a man named Clifford, who had the interpersonal skills of a parking meter. Clifford had been angling to bring in a major client, and Bridget's family trust was exactly the kind of account that moved his bonus needle. Clifford and my husband had been introduced at a charity gala. They'd played golf. They had one of those male bonding alignments that somehow always seem to cost a woman something. 6 weeks after the assignment swap, Clifford called me into his office. "We're restructuring the senior analyst team," he said. He didn't use the word fired. He never did. Men like Clifford had MBAs specifically so they could avoid direct sentences. My position was being eliminated, effective in 30 days. A severance package, respectable, legal, not generous, would be provided. I sat in that chair and I looked at the framed photo of Clifford's boat on the wall behind him and I thought, there it is. I thanked him. I stood up. I shook his hand, which I will regret for the rest of my life, and I walked back to my office and started packing. That was the moment my husband walked in with Bridget. Not to see me, I know that now. They were there for an introductory meeting with Clifford, a new client tour. My husband, ever the project manager, was escorting his girlfriend to her first meeting with the firm that had just eliminated my position. The timing was not a coincidence. I have since confirmed it was not a coincidence. He saw me in the lobby with my box. He looked at me the way you look at someone you used to know, someone whose name you can't quite place. Then his expression shifted into something that I can only describe as satisfaction. "Nadia," he said, like a statement. Like a period at the end of a sentence. Bridget was on his arm. She had the decency to look at the floor. "Tough break," he said. "Didn't know they were making cuts." He did know. I found that out later, too. "You'll land somewhere," he said. "You're resourceful." Always were. He said it the way people say things they've practiced. Smooth, almost kind, but with something underneath it, a glint, just for a second, that said, "Look at you now." I looked at him, I shifted the cardboard box from one arm to the other, and I said very quietly, "Okay, just that, okay." And I walked out. I wish I could say that the next chapter of my story was triumphant immediately. It wasn't. The first 3 months after I left Hargrove were the hardest of my adult life. I filed for unemployment. I ate a lot of soup. I went to therapy every Thursday with a woman named Dr. Reeves, who had a plant on her windowsill that somehow never died, which I found both impressive and deeply irritating. I cried in my car. I power walked around Cheeseman Park at 6 in the morning because I couldn't sleep and I needed to put the energy somewhere. But I also made a spreadsheet. I know that sounds like a joke. It isn't. When the world feels unmanageable, I build a structure. I have always been this way. When I was 9 and my parents' marriage was falling apart, I organized my book collection alphabetically by author and then cross-referenced it by genre. When my college roommate told me I was too intense to be around, I made a budget for my emotional energy and stuck to it. The spreadsheet I built after losing my job was titled simply, "What I Know." Column 1, Assets. The buyout from the house, the severance package, a modest investment portfolio I'd been quietly building since my mid-20s, and most significantly, a piece of land outside Estes Park, Colorado, that my mother had left me when she passed 3 years earlier. 23 acres on a ridge with a creek running through the eastern edge. My husband had always wanted to sell it. I had always refused. He called it sentimental dead weight. I called it mine. Column 2, Opportunities. This is where it got interesting. I had been out of Hargrove for about 6 weeks when I got a call from a former colleague, a woman named Zoe, who had left the firm a year earlier to join a boutique investment advisory group out of Boulder. They were expanding. They were looking for someone with exactly my background. The compensation was 20% higher than what Clifford had been paying me. I took the meeting. I also took the job. And while all of that was quietly happening, something else was happening too. Something I hadn't planned for, but that I had, in a way, been watching build for months. The Estes Parkland had come to my attention in a different way. A developer, a large one, the kind with a regional footprint and a long horizon, had been quietly acquiring parcels in that corridor for 2 years. Ridge properties with elevation, creek access, proximity to Rocky Mountain National Park. The kind of land that, in the right regulatory environment, could become something significant. My land sat in the middle of their intended acquisition path. I knew this because I know how to read a land registry. I know how to track recorded easements and lot line adjustments. I know how to look at a pattern of purchases and reverse engineer an intention. My attorney sent a quiet inquiry to the developer's acquisitions team. What I got back was not a lowball offer. What I got back was a number that made me sit down on my kitchen floor for a full minute with my back against the cabinet. $4.2 million. For land my husband had called sentimental dead weight. I did not call him. I did not text Bridget. I signed the contract, transferred the funds into a trust my attorney had set up, and went to Dr. Reeves on Thursday and said something happened. And she looked at me with that calm face she has and said, "Tell me about it." And for the first time in a year, I didn't cry. Now here is the part I have gone back and forth about telling, because it involves a moment that wasn't dignified. It was actually a little messy, but it is also the moment that clarified everything, so I'm going to tell it exactly the way it happened. My husband and Bridget got engaged. I heard about it the way you hear most things you never wanted to know, through a mutual friend who texted me, "Did you see her Instagram?" with 3 exclamation points and, I assume, the best of intentions. I didn't look at the Instagram. What I did do, about 4 months after that, was attend a retirement party for Helen, my old manager, the good one, at a restaurant called 11 on Larimer. Helen had put 12 years into that firm, and a group of us, people who had genuinely respected her, had put together a dinner. I almost didn't go. I was tired. I'd had a long week. I talked myself into it because Helen deserved a full room. He was there, my husband. I didn't know he'd been invited. Apparently he and Helen had overlapped on some professional committee, one of those downtown business association things. It was a genuine surprise for both of us. He was alone. Bridget was apparently traveling. He looked, and I noticed this, I'm human. He looked a little tired, a little less sure of himself than the man who had told me it was a tough break in the lobby. We ended up near each other at the bar while people were getting their drinks before dinner. The avoidance geometry of a small space only holds for so long. "Congratulations," I said, because it was the honest thing to say when someone gets engaged, and I have made myself a rule about saying honest things. He said thank you. He asked how it was going. "Really well," I said, which was true. "I heard you're at a new place," he said. "The Boulder Group. For about a year now," I said. "I like it." He nodded. He turned his glass a little on the bar, and then he said it. The thing that I have replayed since, not because it hurt me, it didn't, not anymore, but because it was so exactly him. "I always figured you'd bounce back fine," he said. "You're the kind of person who lands on her feet. Doesn't really need anyone." He meant it almost as a compliment. That was the remarkable thing. He genuinely thought he was saying something positive. That's what a decade of half attention does. It lets a man believe he understood a woman he never bothered to actually know. "That's interesting," I said, because for 9 years I would have said the same thing about us, that we didn't need anything else, that what we had was enough. I picked up my drink. Turns out I was wrong about that too. He didn't have an answer for that. I didn't need him to. I went to dinner. I sat next to Helen and we talked about her plans, her sister's place in Santa Fe, a road trip she was taking through New Mexico in the spring. It was a genuinely good evening. I drove home with the window down even though it was October and cold, because I needed the air, and I did not think about him once on the ride back. What I thought about instead was a conversation I'd had that week with the senior partner at my new firm, a man named Arthur who wore the same lasers on rotation and had quietly built one of the most respected independent advisory practices in the Mountain West. Arthur had taken me to coffee, real coffee, not a meeting, actual coffee at a shop down the street from the office, and told me he was thinking about the next chapter. Not retirement exactly, more like elevation. He wanted to step back from client management and focus on strategy. He was thinking about who he trusted to take over the primary client relationships. He was looking at me when he said it. "I'd need someone who thinks longs," he said. "Not just about returns, about structure, about what a client's money is actually supposed to do for their life." "That's how I've always thought about it," I said. "I know," he said. "That's why we're having coffee." The director role was offered formally 2 months later. I accepted. That spring, Hargrove and Associates lost 3 of its top-tier clients in a single quarter. One of them was Bridget's family trust. I found out later, through Helen, who stayed connected to people at the firm, that Clifford had mismanaged the onboarding of several high-net-worth clients simultaneously, had overpromised on a structured product that underperformed, and had finally generated the kind of complaint that the firm's compliance officer couldn't quietly route around. The SEC opened a review. Not a criminal investigation, I want to be precise about that. A regulatory review. But those things cast a shadow. Clifford was placed on administrative leave. The firm hired outside counsel. It was, by all accounts, an uncomfortable several months for everyone inside those walls. The account that Bridget's trust had been placed in, the one that Clifford had championed specifically to capture that business, had been structured in a way that was, let's say, not in the client's best interest. Her attorney filed a formal complaint. There were depositions. I was not involved in any of it, but I heard about it in the way that Denver's professional community hears about these things. The city is smaller than it looks. Bridget's engagement to my husband was called off in June. I don't know the specific reason. I don't need to. I know that trust is a load-bearing wall in any structure, and when you remove it, the rest doesn't stand. My husband sold the Craftsman bungalow in Washington Park that fall. The market had shifted. He got less than he'd hoped. He called me once. I still have no idea how he thought that was appropriate, and left a voicemail that started with, "I know this is strange," and ended with something about checking in. I listened to it once, and then I deleted it, and I made myself a cup of tea, and I sat on my balcony and looked at the mountains, and thought about nothing for about 10 minutes, which is something Dr. Reeves has been trying to get me to do for 2 years. I did not call him back. What I want to say, what I've been circling around for this entire story, is that revenge is not the right word for what happened. I didn't plan any of this. I didn't orchestrate his downfall or engineer her loss. What I did was protect what was mine. Keep my name off things that weren't worth it, and stay quiet long enough for the truth to do its own work. The land I refused to sell, the land he called sentimental dead weight, funded a down payment on a condo in 5 Points fully in my name, with a balcony that faces west and gets the light from about 3 in the afternoon until the sun drops behind the range. I have a reading chair in that light. I have a bookshelf I built myself from reclaimed wood. I have a coffee maker that does exactly one thing and does it perfectly. I have a life that is entirely mine. Last month, I ran into someone at a conference in Denver, a woman who knew both me and Bridget back from the years when we were all in the same orbit. She was careful when she brought Bridget's name up, the way people are when they're not sure how much you know or how much you feel. "She's doing okay," the woman said. "I think good," I said, and I meant it. Not warmly, I don't know if I'll ever get back to warm, and I've made my peace with that, but genuinely. I'm not interested in her suffering. I'm interested in my life. "And you?" the woman asked. "How are you doing?" I thought about the condo and the light and the reading chair. I thought about Arthur and the client meetings and the work that finally felt like work I was meant to do. I thought about driving home on an October night with the window down, cold air and mountains, and not one single thought about anyone who had hurt me. "I'm doing really well," I said, and that was the truest thing I'd said in a long time. The Craftsman bungalow in Washington Park sold in November. I drove past it once, not on purpose. I was cutting through the neighborhood after a dinner near South Gaylord, and the route just happened to take me down that block. The porch light was on. Someone new was inside, probably eating dinner or watching television or doing all the ordinary things that make a house into a home. I didn't slow down. I drove straight through and got on I-25 and headed north, back to my condo, back to my balcony, back to the mountains. I never looked back.